I am Mira. I am 34 years old and I am a high school teacher in Denver, Colorado. For 2 years, 2 full years, I believed I had a perfect marriage, that I had found the man meant for me, the one who would protect me, cherish me, and stand beside me through everything. My husband Evan used to be the model of what I believed I had always dreamed of. He was attentive, gentle, always checking on me, always noticing me, always standing at the door when I came home from teaching, or standing in the kitchen cooking dinner, filling the house with the smell of garlic onions and melting butter. He worked from home as a software engineer, so almost every day when I came home he was there, smiling and asking me about school, as if that were the most important thing in the world. Sometimes he cooked dinner in advance. Sometimes we cooked together, standing side by side at the stove, cutting vegetables, while sharing little stories about the students and the silly things that happened during the day. And every night, never missing a single time, he would bring in a glass of water and 2 vitamins, place them in my hand, kiss my forehead, and say in a voice so warm that I once thought nothing could ever destroy it, "Gotta keep my girl healthy." I trusted him. God, I trusted him with everything I had, with my heart, my future, my safety, my absolute belief that this man I married would never do anything to harm me. I gave him everything, held nothing back, and trust is the most dangerous gift you can unknowingly give to the wrong person. Because what I discovered when I stopped swallowing those pills, when I opened my eyes for the first time to truly see what was happening right there in my own home, inside my own body, shattered everything. It crushed every memory that once felt happy, turned every "I love you" into a wound, and transformed the marriage I once cherished into a beautiful lie wrapped too carefully. It made me unable to recognize who I was anymore, unable to understand what kind of life I had been living all that time. But before I tell you everything, before I pull you into the nightmare I lived through for months, I need you to do something. If you are listening to this story, please hit like, subscribe, and comment to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every comment, and it makes me feel less alone, like someone out there is listening. Like this story I nearly had to trade myself to escape from, might reach someone and maybe save them from something similar. Because if this could happen to me, an educated, cautious, independent woman, then it could happen to anyone. And trust me, you're going to want to know how it ends, what I found, what I did, and how I survived. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the point when I still believed I was living a normal life, or at least something that looked like normal. Evan and I got married 3 years ago. We met at a tech conference in Seattle. I was taking my students to a STEM event, and he was giving a presentation on information security. Ironically, the man standing in front of hundreds of people talking about protecting systems from attackers turned out to be the biggest threat to my own safety. But I couldn't have known that then. Back then, he was just a smart, confident man, kind, in a way that made you want to trust him from the very first minute. We dated for a year. He proposed. A small backyard wedding at a friend's place. Everything was perfect. My mother loved him. My father loved him. My friends said I was lucky. I thought so too. The first year of marriage was the happiest time of my life. We renovated the house, traveled, talked about having kids someday. I truly believed I had found the person who would walk with me through life. Until about 6 months before everything collapsed, when Evan became interested in healthcare in a new way. He bought a new bottle of vitamins from some organic store. He said I was a teacher, stressed easily, tired, easily sleepless. He explained each benefit in detail like a nutrition expert, and I let him take care of me. I trusted him. I didn't question anything. I didn't think there was any reason to doubt the man I slept next to every night. At first, everything seemed normal. I took the pills, I went to sleep, I woke up. But then slowly, little things began to slip very softly, very subtly, so subtly that if you weren't paying attention, you would think you were simply more stressed than usual. I forgot conversations Evan said we had. I forgot plans he claimed I suggested. I stood in front of my class and felt thoughts slip out of my mind as if they had never existed. I began waking up in different pajamas than the ones I wore to bed. I had small bruises Evan said must have come from bumping into something, and I believed him, over and over again, until that night, the night I noticed the pill tasted a bit different, more bitter, dissolving faster, and for the first time in 2 years, real fear slipped into my body. That night, I brought the pill to my lips, but I didn't swallow. I pretended. And that night, everything began to reveal itself. I remember very clearly the feeling as I lay down on the bed that night, the soft blanket over my body, the warm yellow glow of the night lamp, the ceiling fan spinning steadily above me, and the 2 vitamins slowly dissolving in my mouth, but not flowing into my body the way they always had. I hid them under my tongue, and when Evan turned away, I pushed them into my cheek, like a child trying to hide the fact that she hadn't done her homework. But the biggest difference was, my life might have depended on that clumsy little trick. I lay there, my hand resting on my stomach, my eyes closed, trying to keep my breathing steady. What I feared most at that moment wasn't him finding out I hadn't swallowed the pills. It was that I would be overwhelmed by the familiar pull my body had learned after so many months. Because even though I didn't swallow them, my body still reacted as if I had. I felt the drowsiness tug at my eyelids like a heavy curtain, familiar and terrifying. The exhaustion I once thought was teacher fatigue now felt like a toxic lullaby coursing through my blood every night. I had to bite hard into the inside of my cheek to keep myself awake. I clenched my hands so tightly that my nails dug deep into my palms. I counted backward from 2,000 to 1. I did everything I could just to avoid sinking into the artificial sleep Evan wanted me to fall into. About half an hour later, I heard the bedroom door open. The sound was very soft, very slow, like the footsteps of someone who did not want to make a noise. A cold draft brushed across my face when he entered. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes nearly shut, trying to keep my eyelids from trembling. I felt Evan standing beside the bed, his breath warm against my face like small waves. He leaned in very close, too close, closer than any goodnight kiss he'd ever given me. He was checking if the medicine had kicked in. For months, I had allowed him to check on me like that without knowing it. I could feel goosebumps rise all over my skin, but I stayed quiet. He stood there for a few seconds, then several dozen seconds, and finally he straightened up. The door closed behind him so softly, I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. But then I heard footsteps in the hallway, not the relaxed footsteps of someone heading to bed, but purposeful, quick, decisive steps. I stayed still, not daring to move even a little. Time passed painfully slowly. I kept expecting him to return and check again, but he didn't. The silence stretched so long I started counting every heartbeat. Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., I heard the door open again. I opened my eyes, just the tiniest bit enough to make out Evan's silhouette in the room. He didn't turn on the light. He moved faster than before, as if he were certain I was completely under. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something I couldn't see clearly. The faint light from the hallway only outlined the shape of his hand. He stood by the bed, watching me for a long time, so long that my chest felt like it was going to explode from trying to keep my breathing steady. Then he turned away. The door closed once again. His shadow disappeared into the silence. I heard him walking downstairs, each wooden step creaking faintly under his weight. I stayed there gripping the bedsheet, not daring to move, not daring to breathe too loudly. I didn't know what I was waiting for, a sound, a sign, an explanation. I only knew that somewhere downstairs in the very house I had believed was safe, something frightening was happening. It wasn't until 2:13 a.m. that I heard the next sound, Evan's footsteps. But this time, he wasn't headed toward the kitchen or the bathroom. He was headed toward the basement door. The basement door opened with the exact old creak I had ignored hundreds of times. I heard the rusty hinge, the rush of cold air from below, then the door closing, not slammed but closed by someone trying to hide all sound. I felt my pulse pounding in my head. Our basement was barely used, just some old boxes, some tools Evan occasionally tinkered with. I had never seen him show any real interest in it. And now in the middle of the night, he went down there, alone, after making sure I was asleep. I waited 5 minutes that felt like an hour. Then I sat up, My head spun from the incomplete sleep, but I managed to pull my legs out of bed. I took each step so lightly I felt like I was floating. I was terrified that even the sound of my heartbeat might alert him. I stood before the basement door, my hand trembling uncontrollably, pressing my ear against the cold wood. At first I only heard the ventilation fan, then voices. Not just Evan, two people. Evan's voice soft but clear. "She won't wake up. The dose is perfect this time." Another man's voice deep and unfamiliar. "You sure I don't want any risks? Trust me. All these months she's never woken up once." My world stopped. I covered my mouth to keep myself from crying out. My whole body went cold, so cold I could no longer feel my limbs. I didn't know what they were talking about, didn't know what was happening down there, but I knew one thing for certain. I was right not to swallow that pill. And I survived tonight only because of one decision. I stepped back, barely able to feel the ground. I don't remember how I made it back to the bedroom. I only remember curling into bed, shaking uncontrollably as if I had caught a fever. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, pressed my body into the mattress, and pretended to sleep deeply. An hour later, I heard Evan come back upstairs. He opened the bedroom door. He leaned down to check on me again. I squeezed my eyes shut, kept my breathing steady while my chest felt like it was about to burst. Then he exhaled a quiet, satisfied sigh and went to sleep as if nothing had happened. And I lay there, eyes closed, tears running toward my temples, knowing that from the moment I heard that conversation in the basement, my life had taken a turn with no way back. The next morning, when the first sunlight slipped through the curtains and spilled across my face, I didn't know when I had dozed off, or whether I had truly slept at all, or if I had simply lain there in a half-conscious haze waiting for morning, like waiting for a lifeline. I only knew that when I opened my eyes, my entire body ached, as though I had just endured a journey far too long, far too tense, and my mind hung suspended on the brink of panic. And Evan, the man I once believed would protect me, was standing beside the bed, smiling as he always did, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Good morning, baby," he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "Did you sleep well?" That question one he had asked hundreds of times became a cold blade twisting into my chest. I looked into his eyes, the eyes I once thought held warmth, and for the first time in 3 years of living together, I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me anymore. I saw the calmness, the natural ease in his posture, the practiced way he pretended to care. He played his role too well, too effortlessly, too deliberately, and I knew that with just one wrong blink, one subtle change in my demeanor, he would realize that I knew something. So I had to smile, had to take the cup of coffee, had to say the sentence I hated myself for saying I slept great. "Thank you." I knew my voice trembled slightly. I prayed he wouldn't notice. Evan merely smiled satisfaction, flickering across his face as usual, because he believed that last night I had slept deeply, completely still, completely unaware, like a doll placed exactly where he wanted. When he went downstairs to prepare breakfast, I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. My eyes were red, the skin beneath them swollen, my complexion pale. In the dim light, my face looked like a blurred, washed-out version of myself. I braced my hands on the sink, trying to breathe deeply, but even my breath shook. I remembered the voice inside my head the night before calling Evan's name with absolute trust. Now that name made me want to vomit. I had been living with a stranger, sleeping beside a stranger, taking pills from a stranger, and that stranger was my husband. Humiliation mixed with terror surged through me like a breaking wave, making me grip the sink to keep from collapsing. I washed my face, wiped away the tears, then tried to force my features back into something normal, or at least normal enough that Evan wouldn't suspect. When I walked into the kitchen, he was making scrambled eggs and sausages, the smell of butter and coffee filling the room. Since I once loved so much, they were synonymous with home. This morning they made me nauseous. Evan turned around, saw me, and his smile grew wider. "You look a little tired. Probably the weather changing." He placed a plate in front of me. "You need to eat well." I lowered my head, pretending to fuss with my fork so I wouldn't have to look into his eyes. I felt like I was sitting beside a predator disguised as a man, and I had to act as though I knew nothing. "I love you," Evan said suddenly, his voice soft as silk. "I just want you to be healthy." That sentence sent ice down my spine. I nodded, forcing down the lump in my throat. "I know." But in my mind, another sentence screamed, "You don't want me healthy. You want me unconscious. You want me easy to control." And then another thought, sharper, more gut-wrenching. If I hadn't stayed awake last night, what would he have done when he thought I wouldn't ever wake up? My hands trembled so badly I had to set the fork down. I was afraid Evan would notice, afraid he would know. But he remained calm, eating breakfast, making a few bland jokes like any other day, his ease even more terrifying. When he went into the bathroom to shower, I finally allowed myself to exhale. My fingernails had pressed so hard into my palms they'd left deep red marks. I stood up slowly, my legs nearly giving way. I had to do something. I had to know what was happening in my own home. I had to find proof. I walked into Evan's office, the room he always locked during work hours, but this morning he'd left the door open in his rush. The desk was spotless, too spotless as if everything had been arranged deliberately. I reached for his laptop. I tried the password, our anniversary date. Wrong. My birthday. Wrong. His birthday. Wrong. His mother's name. Wrong. My heart pounded harder with each incorrect password. I knew if I tried too many times, it would lock. I glanced at the corner of the room where there was a drawer that had never been locked before. But now, it had a small silver lock on it. I knelt down, my hands trembling. This lock was new. I was certain. I had never seen it before, and seeing it made goosebumps rise across my entire body. Evan was hiding something, and what I heard last night in the basement told me it wasn't work documents. I didn't have a key. I didn't know if I had enough time to search. I put everything back exactly as it was, then left the room before Evan stepped out of the shower. When I closed the car door on my way to school, my hands were still shaking. I sat in the driver's seat, buckled my seatbelt, and stared through the windshield. My breath fogged the glass. I felt like I was watching the life of another woman, not my own. A woman who thought she had chosen the right man. A woman who had slept beside someone who betrayed not just her heart, but her body. A woman slowly realizing that her entire marriage was built on a lie so dark it felt suffocating. In the school parking lot, I remained seated, gripping the steering wheel. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I knew something terrible was unfolding, and if I didn't act, I might not get another chance to escape. But to uncover the truth, I needed something Evan couldn't manipulate. I needed evidence, and I needed it before he realized I was starting to suspect him. I could barely remember how I taught my first classes that morning. I stood before my students, holding my lesson plan, looking at their familiar faces. My mouth speaking about literary analysis, but every word that left my lips felt like it belonged to a stranger. My body stood there talking, teaching, moving through the motions, but my mind was still trapped inside that house on the quiet street where the basement held a second voice I had never heard before, the voice of a stranger my husband whispered to while I was supposedly unconscious. I remember writing on the board when my hand trembled so hard the chalk snapped in two. My students exchanged glances. One of them asked if I was okay. I didn't dare tell the truth. I just smiled weakly and said I hadn't slept well. If they knew what kind of sleep I had been experiencing for months, they would have been horrified for me. During lunch break, I sat alone in the empty classroom, staring at the ceiling, trying to sort through my thoughts. All I knew so far was this: I could no longer trust my own memory, because my body may have been robbed of consciousness. During nights, I thought I was simply sleeping. And if I couldn't trust my memory, I needed something else to protect myself. Something out of Evan's reach, out of his control. I needed evidence, not suspicion, not intuition, not a few bruises he could easily claim were from bumping into furniture. I needed something he couldn't deny. At first, I thought about going to the police immediately, but I knew the harsh reality of the system far too well. A woman showing up at a precinct claiming her husband was doing something in their house at night, that she suspected she was being drugged but had no blood test to prove it, that she heard a strange man's voice in the basement. Without concrete evidence, it would all sound vague, uncertain. I could already picture the skeptical looks on the officers' faces before they even spoke. I needed something they couldn't overlook, but something even more frightening loomed over me. I knew Evan well enough to understand that if he suspected I had discovered anything, if he noticed even the slightest change in my behavior, I wouldn't get a second chance. He had managed to drug me for months without leaving obvious signs. A man capable of that was certainly a man capable of erasing me from existence without leaving a trace. My hands grew sweaty just thinking about it. I knew I was running out of time. I had to act before he did something I couldn't crawl my way back from. When the final bell rang, I didn't go straight home. I sat in my car, my hands trembling so badly I had to fasten the seatbelt twice. Denver was colder than usual that afternoon, the wind pushing against the windows as if the world itself was warning me that I had stepped into a different reality, a reality where the enemy lived inside my house and slept beside me every night. I drove to an electronics store on the outskirts of the city. I didn't know when I made the decision, only that when I walked through the doors, the bright neon lights and familiar pop music made my chest tighten. People around me were buying speakers, smartphones, TVs, living normal lives while I was here to buy the tools I needed to expose the man I once loved. I stood for a long time in front of a display of miniature security cameras. A young employee, probably a college student, approached me cheerfully and asked, "What kind would you like, ma'am, for pets or for house sitters?" I wanted to laugh, or cry, or scream, or tell him that I was looking for a device to watch what my husband was doing to me while I lay helpless in my own bed. But instead, I forced a smile and said, "I need something small, something that can be hidden." He showed me 2 models, both no larger than a thumb. I listened as he explained Wi-Fi connectivity, cloud storage, backup batteries, night vision, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I chose 2, paid in cash so Evan couldn't trace the transaction, walked out of the store clutching the bag to my chest like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes, unable to move. I stared at the bag, at the steering wheel, at the gray sky ahead. Everything weighed on me like a storm. I knew I had crossed a line. Once those cameras entered my home, my marriage would never be the same again. I would know the truth, and the truth would destroy everything. But I also knew this, if I didn't do it, I might never have the chance to know anything at all. I took a deep breath, started the car, and drove home. When I walked through the door, Evan was standing in the kitchen wearing a black apron, cooking dinner as usual. He turned around and smiled that same familiar smile, one that now twisted my stomach. "You're home. I'm making risotto." "You like that, right?" I forced a weak smile I hoped was convincing. "Sounds good." While he cooked and chatted about a project he was working on, I only caught pieces of his words. My mind was calculating time. Evan went for a run every day at 5:30 p.m. He always came back about an hour later. That meant I had less than an hour to place the 2 cameras in the 2 most important places, the bedroom where I slept and the basement where he spoke with the strange man. At 5:28, he tied his shoelaces. At 5:29, he checked his phone. At 5:30, he kissed my forehead and stepped out the door, saying the exact sentence he always said, "I'll be back soon. Get some rest." The door closed, and only when his footsteps faded did I realize I had been holding my breath. I had 55 minutes to do something that could alter the entire course of my life. I opened the camera package with trembling fingers. I climbed onto a chair and placed the first one on the bookshelf, facing the bed, angled directly where I slept every night. I tested it on my phone. It worked. I ran to the basement where the cold metallic darkness wrapped around me the moment I stepped down the stairs. I looked around, trying not to replay the voices I heard the night before. I found an old vent opening on the wall, removed the cover, and placed the second camera inside. When I tested it on my phone, the dim, shadowy basement appeared clearly on the screen. I screwed the cover back on, tapped it lightly to make sure it stayed in place, stood still for a moment, gripping the wall as the room swayed slightly because I knew I had just stepped into a war. When the sound of the front door unlocking echoed upstairs, I planted myself in the living room as if I hadn't moved all evening. Evan walked in a rush of cold air following him and smiled. "What were you doing?" "You look tired," I replied. "Nothing." But in my mind, another sentence echoed. "There is so much, and I will uncover all of it, even if the truth destroys the life I've known until now." That night, when Evan walked into the bedroom with a glass of water and 2 vitamins, it felt like every movement he made was happening in slow motion, or perhaps it was simply that my awareness had sharpened so intensely that every sound felt as sharp as a tiny blade. He placed the pills in my hand with his usual tenderness, his eyes so gentle that if I hadn't heard that conversation in the basement, I might have melted at the sight just like every other night. "Take them, baby," he said, his voice soft like a lullaby. "I want you to sleep well." I stared at the pill in my palm, small, harmless looking, like something you could buy by the hundreds at any drugstore, but I knew better. I knew it could make me disappear from the world for hours, months, or forever without anyone questioning it. I looked up at Evan, trying to keep my eyes from reflecting the terror screaming inside my body. I lifted the pill to my lips, tilted my head, as always, and swallowed, or rather, pretended to swallow. I mimicked every familiar movement so perfectly that even I was frightened by how well I had learned to survive being manipulated. Evan smiled, gently brushed my hair, then said the sentence that chilled me far more than any direct threat could. "That's my good girl." I nodded, fighting the goosebumps rising along my skin. He dimmed the lights, leaving only the soft golden glow against the wall. I lay down, closed my eyes, and waited for the artificial drowsiness to flood in. My body had grown so accustomed to the drug that even without swallowing it, my brain still tried to slip into that foggy state like a conditioned reflex. I had to dig my nails into the bedsheet to stay awake. Evan checked my mouth, something he had begun doing recently, a habit I had foolishly not noticed before. Only when he left the room did I dare crack my eyes open. My body felt numb, partly from fear, partly because I genuinely didn't know if I could keep fighting off the drug-like sleepiness much longer. Night of 2:15 a.m. Evan opened the door and looked at me like he was checking a machine he wanted to ensure was functioning exactly as programmed. He left the room and I heard the basement door open. I didn't follow. The camera would do that for me. I just lay there, battling the thick drowsiness that clung to my mind like toxic smoke. When he returned, I kept my breathing steady. He placed his hand on my shoulder for several seconds. I thought my heart would stop. Night 2, the same pattern. Evan gave the pills. I pretended. He checked me. I lay still. My fear was worse than the first night because now I knew he was doing something downstairs that he absolutely didn't want me to know about. He seemed more cautious, too, standing by the bed longer, watching me more intently as if he sensed something was different. When he left the room, I nearly bolted out of the house, but I couldn't. I needed evidence. I needed to prove to myself and the world that I wasn't imagining things. I lay motionless like a corpse, feeling every second stretch painfully thin, as if I could hear time dripping onto the floor. Night 3. The night I wasn't sure I would survive to see sunlight, not because Evan did anything differently, but because I was exhausted physically, mentally, dangerously close to letting my body surrender to the false sleep that I once thought was natural, but had been forced upon me all along. I had to pinch my arms so hard it left red marks the next morning just to stay conscious. But the third night was different in one disturbing way. Evan didn't go to the basement. He still gave me the pills. He still checked me. He still left the room at the usual time. But instead of the basement door opening, I heard him walk into his office. I heard the chair scrape. I heard typing on his keyboard. I heard the faint shifting of something heavy, something I had never heard before. And I knew through an intuition I could no longer dismiss that he was doing something with data, with images, with me. I stayed still. My eyes barely open to keep myself awake, thinking of the camera silently recording everything. It was seeing what I could not dare to see. It was the only pair of eyes in this house that Evan couldn't manipulate. When I heard Evan return to the bedroom, I shut my eyes quickly. He leaned in again. I steadied my breathing. He touched my neck to check my pulse, an action that once would have felt intimate but now made me want to break down and sob. He exhaled softly, apparently satisfied, apparently convinced I suspected nothing. He got into bed beside me. He pulled the blanket over us. He wrapped his arm around my waist and held me the way a loving husband might on an ordinary peaceful night. I had to fight the instinct to scream. I had to lie still in the arms of a man who might have been doing unthinkable things to my body for months. I had to listen to him breathe against my ear as if we were just another happily married couple in a normal home. I waited for him to fall asleep, counted each breath, each rise and fall of his chest. And when he finally snored softly, a sign he was deeply asleep, I allowed myself a full breath for the first time in hours. But I knew one thing for certain: I could not survive another night like this. I couldn't lie there in the dark without knowing what was happening in the basement. I had to see what the camera recorded, and I had to see it the moment I had the chance. The next morning, when Evan said he needed to go out to meet a client, I knew this was my first and possibly only opportunity to see what had been happening in my own home in the hours when he believed I was unconscious. When the door closed and I heard his car fade down the driveway, I stood in the living room, my heart pounding so hard the entire cage of my ribs seemed to vibrate. I opened my phone, logged into the cloud account Evan didn't know I created, opened the basement camera, and what I saw? Nothing in this world could have prepared me for it. I thought I was prepared. I thought that after 3 nights of pretending to sleep after those whispered voices in the basement, after knowing for certain that Evan had been keeping me unconscious, nothing could shock me anymore. But human beings are creatures capable of hurting repeatedly in the same place, and the pain keeps digging deeper and deeper until you no longer recognize the parts of yourself that remain. When I opened the basement camera on my phone, my hand shook so violently I nearly dropped the device. The footage appeared slightly dark, slightly grainy, but clear enough for me to see Evan standing in the room I had always believed held nothing but old boxes and a few unimportant tools. But no. In the video, the basement looked completely different. Not different in objects, but in atmosphere. It no longer looked like the unused storage space of an ordinary American home. It had purpose. It had intention. And that intention sent a cold ripple down my spine. Evan entered from the stairs, his familiar posture, unmistakable shoulders, slightly hunched, walking quickly, yet with minimal sound, as if he knew exactly where to place his feet to avoid the creaking boards. He checked his phone, pressed a few buttons, then lifted his head towards something outside the frame. I heard the basement door open again, and another man's voice echoed through the space. That voice was real, close, not the faint whisper I had heard through floorboards under the cover of night. It was the voice of a grown man standing inside my home speaking to my husband while I lay upstairs presumed unconscious. "She's out," the man asked. Evan nodded. "Out cold. Like always, like always, like always." Those 2 words made my vision blur. This wasn't the first time, not accidental, not a mistake, not something that suddenly happened to me. He'd been doing this for months, intentionally, calculated, refined. The man stepped fully into the frame. I didn't recognize him. Gray jacket, dusty shoes, the way he scanned the basement like he was appraising merchandise made my stomach knot. Evan handed him an envelope. The man opened it, flipped through several bills, then nodded in satisfaction. My entire body went numb. Money. A transaction. An exchange happening in my home. Evan took a laptop from the tool bench. He opened it. The man leaned closer. Both of them stayed silent for several seconds, but the expressions on their faces made me want to vomit. Evan moved his finger across the trackpad, and the man grinned a grin so sickening that even now, remembering it, my spine freezes. I couldn't hear what they were saying because the audio glitched at that moment, but the man's expression glittering with a twisted excitement said it all. I couldn't see the screen, but I didn't need to. I could tell by the way he licked his lips, by the way Evan watched him for his reaction. It was me, my body, in a state where I could not defend myself. My hand flew to my chest because it felt like my heart had fallen into my stomach. The air in the house grew thick and nauseating, forcing me to lean against the wall to stay upright. I scrubbed the video backward a few seconds, praying I had imagined it praying. My mind was exaggerating the horror. But no, it was real, too real. Evan clicked a few more buttons. A file opened on the laptop in the footage. Its glow reflected onto the man's face, and he tilted his head as if evaluating a valuable object. No one said it aloud, but I could feel their conversation like a blade sliding straight into my spine. Then Evan pointed upward toward the staircase, toward the bedroom, toward the place I lay every night. The man looked up, his eyes landing in the direction of the basement camera, as if he could see straight through the screen of my phone, straight into me. I held my breath. A long, awful moment. Even though he couldn't see me, I felt as if he knew exactly who I was, exactly whose unconscious body he had been paying to view, exactly which woman was the target of all of this. Evan smiled faintly, a smile I once believed was gentle, but now looked like the mask of a demon. He patted the man's shoulder and stepped away briefly. When he returned, he was holding another envelope. He handed it over. More money, a larger amount. The man pocketed it, climbed halfway up the stairs, but stopped, turning back toward Evan. "When's the next one?" he asked. Evan shrugged, as if discussing car maintenance rather than the most revolting betrayal a husband could commit. "When I need more. Tuesday or Friday." She never wakes up. She never wakes up. My heart constricted painfully. No one should ever hear that sentence spoken about themselves. No one should live in a home where their spouse refers to them as though they are an object. They parted ways like two businessmen completing a clean transaction. Evan closed the basement door. Everything continued as if nothing had happened. He went to the kitchen, washed his hands, got a drink, checked the time, and then went upstairs to sleep next to me. While had I not pretended that night, I would have lain helpless in the dark, unaware of everything. I watched the footage 2 more times. Each time the pain layered itself deeper into me, the fear tightening around my throat like an invisible hand. I didn't know how long I sat there. I didn't know how many times my breathing hitched. I only knew that my life had just been torn apart piece by piece without mercy. I pushed myself away from the chair, stumbling backward as if the phone screen itself could hurt me. But then one truth cut through the haze. I had evidence. And if I wanted to live, I had to leave that house. Today. Right now. I don't remember how long I stood in the living room. All I know is that once the initial numbness faded, my entire body began trembling. As if I had just survived a car accident my mind hadn't processed yet. I looked around the house, a place that once felt warm, once felt like the safest place I knew, and suddenly it felt too quiet, too clean, too peaceful in a way that felt fake. Like everything inside it was a stage for the crimes Evan had been orchestrating for months. Every wedding photo on the wall, every mug he once handed me, every throw pillow on the sofa, all of it had become evidence of the deepest betrayal a person could experience. Nothing was real anymore. Nothing belonged to me anymore. I looked at his neatly placed shoes by the door, and a cold shock ran down my spine because they reminded me that he could come back at any moment. I thought about how he had stood right there in this very house, watching me sleep while I was drugged, then walking down to the basement with another man, the one who had paid to see my unconscious body like merchandise. I had to leave, immediately. Hesitation was a luxury I no longer had. I ran into the bedroom, opened the closet, and grabbed a duffel bag. I couldn't think beyond 2 words, "Get out." I shoved clothes into the bag clumsily, my hands shaking so hard that I struggled to pull the zipper closed. I opened the drawer and grabbed my passport-ID, bank documents, anything I could think of in the short time I had. I unplugged chargers, stuffed my laptop inside, snatched my phone and wallet. Every movement was frantic, desperate like a trapped bird trying to break free from an invisible net it never realized had been wrapped around it. But there was one thing I could not forget. I needed to take all the evidence with me. I opened the cloud account and downloaded a copy of the video onto a USB drive. Then I sent another copy to a backup email one Evan had no access to. Then a third copy to a newly created anonymous account. I couldn't risk the evidence disappearing, the only thing protecting my life. When the files finished compressing and the upload confirmed, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. But that breath barely left my lungs before a small noise outside the window made me freeze. My heartbeat slammed so hard I thought it might burst. I stood still for several seconds, every muscle sharp with listening. Nothing followed. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe a leaf brushing the windowsill. Or maybe Evan was back. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. I couldn't stay to find out. If Evan walked in and saw the bag, saw my panic, saw the cloud footage open, saw the USB on the table, I wasn't sure I would leave that house alive. I grabbed the bag and hurried downstairs, forcing my footsteps to stay quiet. I turned off the living room lights, locked the back door, then opened the garage. Denver's cold air slapped my face, making my eyes sting. I unlocked the car with trembling hands and climbed inside. When the engine started, it felt like the whole world erupted with the sound. I reversed slowly, trying not to let the tires scrape loudly against the concrete. As I drove away, I checked the rearview mirror and saw my house. The house I once believed was my safe haven shrinking behind me. The late afternoon sunlight made the brick exterior look postcard perfect, but that piece was only paint over rot. During the entire drive, I had one thought: don't look back. Don't look. Don't look. If I looked back, I knew I would fall apart. I drove toward a cafe off Colfax, one where I knew the owner never asked too many questions. When I stepped inside the door, chimes startled me. I pulled my hood up, chose the quietest corner table, and tried to steady my breathing. I texted Felisa, my closest friend, the only person I could call without fear of judgment. The message had only 3 words: I need you. Less than a minute later, Felisa called. Her voice was frantic. Mira, what happened? Are you okay? I wanted to say no. I wanted to say, you can't imagine what just happened. I wanted to say I've been living with a monster, but my throat closed. I managed only a few words. I can't go home. Felisa was silent for a few seconds, then spoke in the tone I knew would be the anchor keeping me from drowning. Okay, send me your location. I'm coming now. I typed the address, sent it, then placed the phone on the table and looked at my hands. They were still shaking, as if all the horror I'd endured was pouring out through my fingertips. I knew one thing with absolute clarity: after today, my life would never be the same. But I didn't yet know that what I had seen on the camera was only the beginning. Felisa arrived in just 12 minutes, so fast that I knew she must have driven like someone out of her mind to get there. When she walked into the cafe, the fear on my face reflected in her eyes instantly. She didn't need to ask where I was sitting. She scanned the room once, and by instinct alone, her gaze landed on the corner where a broken woman was trying to sit small enough not to collapse onto the floor. Mira. Just one word, just my name, but it shattered whatever thin wall was holding my chest together. I burst into tears as if my ribcage had cracked open into 100 pieces. Felisa wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time in hours, maybe months, I felt the touch of someone who did not want to hurt me. When I finally stopped shaking, Felisa sat down and held my hands. Okay, she said softly, tell me. But if you can't talk yet, that's okay too. We can start anywhere. I inhaled deeply, but the breath stuck halfway up my chest. I tried to speak, but only managed Evan. Felisa squeezed my hands tighter. You don't have to rush. I'm here. We'll do this one step at a time. I opened my phone and pulled up the basement footage. I slid it toward Felisa without another word. I didn't have the strength to retell it. No one should ever have to describe to a friend how her husband turned her body into merchandise. Felisa watched, and when the video ended, her face went pale like ash. Mira? Her voice broke. Oh my God. Mira, how long has this been happening? I don't know, I whispered. I don't know anything. Felisa covered her mouth, eyes filling with tears that did not fall. It wasn't pity, it was fury. Fury on my behalf, something I was too numb to feel for myself. We have to go to the police, she said. Right now. Hearing those words felt like being yanked backward. I imagined having to tell a stranger everything. I imagined saying words like drugged, unconscious, strange man, camera basement. I imagined them not believing me. Felisa looked at me for a long moment, then said the one thing strong enough to lift me from my seat. Mira, this isn't just your private situation anymore. This is a crime. And if you don't go, I will call them here. I closed my eyes. 1 second, 2. Then I nodded. So we drove to the Denver Police Department Special Investigations Unit. On the way, I clutched the USB in my hand like it was the only rope keeping me from falling off a cliff. Felisa kept her eyes on the road, but every so often she glanced at me as if afraid I would disappear if she didn't check. When I stepped through the station doors, I felt like I was entering another world, a world where truth had a chance to be seen. But I also understood one thing clearly: walking through this door meant there was no going back. A female officer greeted us. When Felisa whispered, "My friend needs to report something extremely serious," the officer's expression changed instantly. I sat in a small interview room. A white light glared down at the metal table. I heard the air conditioner humming the sound of a pen tapping in another room, and I felt like my body had split into 2 parts, one half trying to sit upright so I wouldn't fall apart, the other half merely witnessing my own life, one I no longer recognized. The detective assigned to my case, Detective Carmen Ruiz, sat down across from me. Her eyes held no pity. Instead, there was something else: patience, caution, and a level of focus that told me she had seen victims like me before. "Ms. Mira, whatever you tell me here is important," Detective Ruiz said, "and I need you to tell the truth no matter how hard it is." I let out a broken laugh. "I'm just scared. You won't believe me." Detective Ruiz looked directly into my eyes. "You brought evidence." I nodded and took the USB from my bag. When she plugged it into her laptop and watched the basement footage, I didn't look at the screen. I looked at Felisa. But Felisa's eyes were on Ruiz, and I saw her fist clench tighter and tighter until her knuckles turned white. When the video ended, Detective Ruiz didn't speak right away. She locked the screen, inhaled slowly, then said in a voice that allowed no room for doubt, "Mira, what you've brought here is evidence of multiple serious crimes. Not 1, not 2, a series of offenses we must act on immediately." My throat tightened. "You believe me," Ruiz placed her hand on the USB. "I believe the evidence, and I believe you because you were clear-headed enough to gather it." I wanted to cry again, but I couldn't. My body had run out of tears. Ruiz continued, "We'll need your full statement, then we'll request a warrant for your home. And Mira, you cannot go back there, under any circumstances." "No," I said softly but firmly. "I won't go back." She nodded. "We will protect you." Protect. A word I thought had vanished from my life. I signed paperwork. I recounted everything: the 3 nights, the months of fog, the pills, the basement, the bruises, the sleep that never belonged to me. Ruiz took notes, sometimes nodding, sometimes circling a detail. When I finished, she closed the folder and said, "We're sending a team to your house right now." And in her eyes, I saw the truth that made my stomach twist. My marriage had officially become a criminal investigation. And Evan was no longer just my husband. He was now a suspect. After signing the documents at the police station, I thought I would feel lighter, even just a little. But instead, my entire body grew so heavy that each step felt like I was sinking into the cold tile floor. Detective Ruiz asked me and Felisa to wait in a side room where the lights were softer, the chairs cushioned, and the air less suffocating. But in my head, only one sentence echoed, "They're going to my house." My house. The home I once believed was the safest place in my life. The place where I had placed all my trust, all my heart, all of myself. And now the police were going there as if it were a crime scene. Because it was. Felisa held my hand, but hers was as cold as mine. Maybe it was the first time I had ever seen Felisa scared enough that she couldn't hide it. She was always the strong one, always knowing what to do, how to fix things, but now she just sat still, looking at me with a pain so deep it made me want to apologize, for not seeing the truth sooner, for not escaping sooner, for letting it get this far. About 30 minutes later, Detective Ruiz entered with a new stack of papers in hand. "Mira," she said, voice low and steady, "we've entered the house. Evan is not there." I nodded. "I think he's meeting a client." Ruiz studied me for a moment, then continued, "But we found everything." I didn't want to ask what everything meant. I wasn't sure I was strong enough to hear it, but I needed to know. "Can you explain?" I whispered. Ruiz sat down in front of me, placing the file on the table like she was about to deliver a verdict that neither of us could undo. We unlocked the drawer in Evan's office. Inside, we found 3 large-capacity hard drives, encrypted notebooks, and backup storage devices. She paused as if choosing the gentlest way to say something that had no gentle version. "Mira, the amount of data is more than you can imagine." My chest tightened. "It's videos of me?" Ruiz nodded, and that single nod felt like the entire ceiling collapsed onto my body. "Not just that," she said. "We also found records of cryptocurrency transactions exchanges with multiple men and—" She swallowed. "Documents showing Evan planned to expand his operation." It felt like someone slapped me hard. Expand, he discussed increasing rates, bringing in more clients, even categorizing service packages. We also discovered video editing software and professionally processed footage. I covered my mouth to stop the scream rising in my throat. I hadn't just been betrayed, I hadn't just been drugged. I had been commodified, turned into a product, a revenue stream, a business model. Ruiz continued each sentence, a needle piercing straight into the wound. "We also found pre-installed mini cameras in your bedroom. One of them. Mira, I'm very sorry, recorded footage of you unconscious on multiple occasions. You don't need to see it right now. We'll connect you with a victim support specialist first." I shook my head violently like a child, hoping that enough denial would change reality. No, I don't want to see. I can't." "You don't have to," Ruiz said gently. "But we do need confirmation of identities in the footage. You won't be doing that alone. We have trained personnel for this." I inhaled, but no air reached my lungs. It took several seconds before I realized I was hyperventilating. Felisa immediately wrapped her arms around me, pulling me against her chest. "Mira, listen to me," she whispered. "You're safe now. You're here with me. No one can touch you anymore. No one." But I couldn't believe that. Not yet. No one ever imagines the person sleeping beside them is the most dangerous one. A police officer knocked on the door and whispered something to Ruiz. She nodded and stood. They found Evan's car. My heart jolted so violently it hurt. "Where in front of the office he told you about, but he didn't go inside. He left the car minutes after parking and walked 3 blocks away. Security cameras caught him, leaving the area." "You mean—" "He ran." Ruiz responded without hesitation. "Yes, and we are issuing an arrest warrant right now." I sank back into the chair, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. Evan was running. Evan knew exactly what was happening. He might have seen the police at the house. He might have realized I left. He might have figured out that I knew everything, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Ruiz placed a firm hand on the table, her voice grave. "Mira, you must understand this. Evan is no longer a husband hiding a secret. He is now a suspect in a major criminal case involving multiple counts of assault, trafficking, illegal content, drug administration, and exploitation." I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. But the moment my eyes shut, images flooded back, Evan leaning over me to check my breathing, his hand stroking my hair every night, his voice whispering, "You're my good girl," and me lying there unconscious, unable to fight, unable to speak, unable to know, a living doll, in my own marriage. Ruiz added, "We will move you to a safe location, and Mira, from this moment forward, you cannot contact Evan, not for any reason." I let out a small cracked laugh. I have nothing left to say to him, but deep inside I knew Evan would come after me. Not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of what I had seen. Fear of the evidence I carried. Fear of losing the control he believed he owned. When I stood up to follow Ruiz out of the room, my body still trembled uncontrollably, but my steps were steadier than they had been hours earlier, not because I was strong, but because I had no other choice except survival. That day, I walked out of the police station with something I never imagined I would possess, an emergency protective order against the very man I once loved. But I also walked out with a horrifying realization: Evan was on the run. And a man with nothing left to lose is always more dangerous than one with something to protect. I couldn't sleep for many days after Evan fled. Every car passing by, every shadow brushing against the curtains in the temporary apartment arranged by the police made me flinch, my heart pounding as if Evan were standing right outside the door, waiting for the moment I slipped for him to appear and drag me back to the place I had escaped. Felisa slept on the sofa for several nights to watch over me, even though she never said it out loud. Detective Ruiz called me every morning to update me on the search. Even though I knew I was being protected, the fear still wrapped around my lungs like a thick fog, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know where Evan was, but I knew very well that he was someone who couldn't stand losing control. The thing that scared me most wasn't that he ran, it was that he was silent. The silence of a man accustomed to control is often a warning for a storm. I had lived beside him long enough to understand that. 1 week later, Ruiz called me at 6 a.m. Her voice held no hesitation. "Mira, we have arrested Evan." I sat up instantly. The blanket slipped onto the floor. Felisa jolted awake, staring at me in alarm. "They caught him?" I asked, my voice sounding nothing like my own. "In Colorado Springs," Ruiz said. "He was attempting to buy a bus ticket to New Mexico. A station employee recognized his license plate from the wanted notice and called the police. Evan resisted, but we successfully detained him." I covered my mouth. Not out of joy, not out of relief, but because a sharp pain shot through my body as I realized this was really happening. Evan, the man who once held me every night, the man I trusted down to my bones, was now handcuffed on a highway like a dangerous criminal. And he deserved it. But knowing he deserved it didn't make my heart hurt any less. This wasn't a victory. It was the end of an illusion I had held onto for far too long. "We'll need you to come to the station to finalize some procedures," Ruiz said. "The court is preparing the detention order and charges." That day, when I stepped into the interrogation room to sign cooperation documents and review the arrest report, part of me still couldn't believe I was inside my own story. Everything was happening too fast, too brutally. When the first hearing arrived, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to see Evan. I feared, the moment his eyes met mine, feared seeing anger, or worse, the calmness of someone who still believed he could control me. But Ruiz said, "If you don't want to speak, we understand. But Mira, your presence will show the court the severity of this case." So I walked into the small courtroom at the Denver courthouse, Felisa gripping my hand tightly. The air in the room was so thick it felt like it could be sliced. The murmurs, the sound of pens signing, the echoes of shoes on the wooden floor, all rang sharper than they should have. Evan was brought in through the back door. He wore a light orange prison uniform. His hands cuffed his hair, messy stubble rough across his chin. He looked completely different, as if the skin I once knew had been peeled away, revealing a man full of holes and decay inside. But when his eyes scanned the room and stopped at me, I realized the most horrifying thing: his eyes held no surprise, no fear, no guilt. Only one thing: possession. As if I still belonged to him. I turned away immediately, my hands so cold that Felisa had to rub them to keep me from fainting. The prosecutor assigned to the case was a middle-aged woman, hair tied in a tight bun, her eyes sharp enough that I felt she could cut through any excuse. She read the charges in a steady voice, each sentence falling onto the wooden table like a hammer: administering incapacitating substances without consent, creation and distribution of illegal content involving an unconscious individual, conspiracy to traffic illicit material, violation of privacy rights, assault through chemical means, 12 charges in total. Each one felt like a blow to my heart. Evan's attorney stood to object. He said Evan did not intend harm, that this may be a private matter between husband and wife, that Mira may be misunderstanding or emotionally distressed and misinterpreting the situation. Those words made my stomach twist, because at that moment, I understood something new. Crimes are not committed only by perpetrators, but also sustained by those willing to defend them for money, power, or convenience. The prosecutor placed the USB on the table as if laying my heart before justice. "We have video," she said plainly. "We have timestamps, dates, names of buyers, electronic payment logs, and the victim, Mira, has undergone independent examinations by certified experts. There is nothing to dispute." The courtroom fell silent. Evan looked at me again, and this time I didn't turn away. I met his gaze look directly into the eyes of the man I once trusted and saw the emptiness inside him. I let the pain, the rage, the betrayal rise within me, forming something stronger than fear. And for the first time since the truth came out, I realized I no longer belonged to him. No part of me was in his hands anymore. The judge denied bail due to the high flight risk and the severity of the charges. As Evan was escorted away, he still looked at me, but this time, there was a flicker of desperation behind his eyes. It didn't make me pity him. It allowed me to breathe for the first time in weeks. When the courtroom door shut behind him, I sat down, my hands shaking, but my chest filled with something I didn't dare name relief. Not relief because he was arrested, but because I had survived long enough to see it. Felisa hugged me. Detective Ruiz approached, placed a firm hand on my shoulder, and said, "Mira, from now on, you don't have to fight alone anymore." I looked up at her, and for the first time in many months, I believed it. When the hearing ended and Evan was detained awaiting trial, I thought I would feel as if a massive door had finally shut. But that wasn't the reality. A crime doesn't disappear just because the perpetrator is in handcuffs. Pain doesn't evaporate simply because the truth stands with the victim. My body was free, but my mind was still a room full of shadows. The first weeks in the temporary apartment, I barely slept. I sat against the wall each night, staring at the window, watching the shadows of trees outside, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks, imagining Evan's footsteps. Even knowing he was in custody, I still carried the sense that he could appear at any moment, like a ghost unbound by chains or walls. Some nights I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, my heart racing so hard I had to press my hand to my chest, just to feel that I was still alive, still in control of my own body. Detective Ruiz referred me to a trauma specialist for domestic violence victims. That person, Dr. Helen Graves, didn't judge me, didn't call me weak or naive for trusting the wrong man. She simply looked at me with the eyes of someone who had seen hundreds of women collapse in front of her, then slowly rebuild themselves. She said Mira surviving doesn't only mean escaping danger. It also means understanding that you have the right to continue living, the right to heal, the right to be happy, and you have that right. I listened, but my heart couldn't believe it yet. A shattered trust doesn't heal just because someone says beautiful words. I began therapy twice a week. The first session, I sat in silence for nearly 15 minutes, unable to speak a single word. When I finally opened my mouth, my voice trembled so much I barely recognized it. And I said something I had never dared to admit. "I'm afraid I'll never be the same person again." Helen nodded without interrupting. I broke down crying like an abandoned child crying. Because the loss was so enormous, I didn't know where to place it. When the sobs eased, Helen said, "You won't go back to who you were. But that isn't the frightening part. We'll create a new version, a stronger one, a version no one will ever be able to destroy again." When the official trial took place months later, I stood before 12 people in the jury box and recounted things that had once made me want to hide in the darkest corner of the world. I spoke about the pills. I spoke about the nights then swallowed by blackness without knowing what was being done to my body. I spoke about the camera. I spoke about the laughter of the strange man in the basement. I spoke about nearly losing myself. In the courtroom, Evan sat not far from me, dressed in a prison uniform, hands pressed against the table, trying to maintain composure. But as I described the betrayal, the confusion about who I even was the moment I watched the video for the first time, I saw something shift in his face. Not remorse, not sorrow, but anger, that the truth had slipped beyond his control. The prosecutor presented the hard drives, the transaction logs, the client lists, the basement camera, the bedroom camera. Each piece of evidence was another blade severing the last thread between us. When the judge announced the sentence, I stood frozen. 17 years in prison, no parole before 12, lifetime sex offender registration, lifetime restraining order. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply stood there, feeling as if a storm that had dragged on for months had finally let go, leaving me alone on a cold floor, exhausted but still alive. I left Denver a few months after the trial ended. I needed to start over somewhere. The memories wouldn't cling to me from one corner of the room to the next. I applied to a high school in Portland, Oregon. They accepted me after the first interview. They didn't know anything about my past. They only knew me as Mira Jensen, a literature teacher with slightly sad eyes and a gentle smile. I rented a small apartment, hung new curtains, bought a cactus to place near the window. On the first morning I woke up in Portland, I opened my eyes and realized for the first time in so many months I wasn't afraid. No one was standing at the top of the stairs. No one was checking my breathing. No pills waited for me in a glass cup. I made my own coffee, stepped onto the balcony, breathed in the cold Oregon air, and that feeling was freedom. It took nearly a year before I allowed myself to open my heart to someone new. Not love at first sight, not infatuation, just kindness, stability, calm. His name is Daniel, a student support counselor at the school. He had a warm voice, gentle eyes, and a way of speaking that made me feel safe without trying. He always asked before touching my hand, always stepped back when he saw me tense, always let me set the pace for everything. One day, I asked to see his phone, triggered by an unexpected wave of anxiety, and Daniel handed it to me immediately without a question, simply saying, "You have the right to feel safe. I'll never be someone who scares you." I cried that day, not from pain, but because for the first time in a long time, I understood that there are people who don't need to render you unconscious to feel in control. Some people know how to love as an act of kindness, not as a trap. Now, as I stand in a classroom in Portland watching students discuss passages I have loved since childhood, I realize I've returned from a place I once believed no one could survive. I am no longer the Mira who believed love was always safe, that marriage was a place to rest. But I am no longer the Mira imprisoned in the basement of her own life either. I am the new Mira, the woman who rose from the wreckage, the woman who looked in the mirror and saw a body that had been violated, but a spirit that could not be broken. The woman who knows that healing isn't forgetting. Healing is continuing and living larger than the pain. If someone were to ask me what kept me alive, I would say I didn't fight to get revenge on Evan. I fought to reclaim myself. And I did. Evan took 7 months of my life, but the rest, the entire future I build from here on, belongs to me. Only me. If you've stayed until the very last second to hear Mira's story, thank you. Not just because you took the time to listen, but because you became a witness to the truth of a woman whose voice was once taken from her and who found the courage to take it back. If this story touched you, made you think, or reminded you that anyone can become a victim, please leave a comment below. We read all of them, and every comment is a message to those still living in the dark that you are not alone. Don't forget to hit like so this video can reach more people, and subscribe so you never miss the next stories. Stories about truth, about justice, and about the strength of human beings when facing the very worst. Remember, light only appears when someone is brave enough to speak the truth.